Welcome to Climate Changed, a podcast from the BTS Center. Here we ask you and our guests what it means to live, to love, and to lead in a climate changed world.
Together, we explore how spiritual imagination and real-world practice meet this moment of accelerating change. This season, we're exploring spiritual leadership and imagination in a climate-changed world.
Today's guest is Tory Stephens. Tory publishes climate fiction, weaves networks, and builds relationships that expand the mission of Grist, where he created Imagine 2200, climate fiction for future ancestors. His work asks a simple question with radical implications. What if we wrote stories not about what we fear, but about what we hope to create? Before we begin, a few reflections. As you listen, you'll notice how Tory connects imagination with responsibility, how he treats storytelling itself as a form of spiritual leadership. He challenges us not just to warn each other of impending doom, but to dream together a future possibility.
Autumn's conversation with Tory invites us to think about visioning as a collective practice, something we can learn, something we can teach, and something we can choose every single day.
So, before we dive in, let's ground ourselves. Take a moment to pause. Take a moment to breathe. In her book, Bloodchild and Other Stories, great Octavia Butler wrote, "At its best, science fiction stimulates imagination and creativity. It gets reader and writer off the beaten track, off the narrow footpath of what, quote, everyone is saying, doing, thinking."
Thank you, Octavia. Since this episode explores possibility, creativity, and the futures we dare to shape, we thought we'd begin by letting imagination lead.
Our producer, Peterson Toscano, will share a short speculative story. It is modeled on the type of stories you will hear Tory talk about.
What a profound blessing it is to appear before you for this, the 211th annual BTS Center Convocation. Since our ancestors first gathered in 1905, this convocation has been a steady heartbeat. We stand on over 200 years of tradition, a legacy that has endured through the industrial peaks of the 20th century, the digital storms of the 21st, and the great ecological rebalancing of our own era. Much has changed since those early days in Maine, yet our commitment to spiritual resilience remains our North Star. But I am not here today as a professor of human history. I am an expert on the history of pets and farm animals. I am Timothy Meadows, and for your blessing of biodiverse life, I am here to reveal the history of pets. First, let us travel back to the year 2026. The human population had just exceeded 8 billion people. It was no surprise that the dog and cat populations had also exploded. In the USA alone, the number of pets reached over 200 million. Much like their human companions of that era, many of these animals were caught in a cycle of overconsumption and sedentary living, a byproduct of an era that often prioritized convenience over holistic health. But the world was shifting. With growing droughts and the disruption in grain and meat production in the late 2020s and early 2030s, the cost of pet care grew dramatically. While pets provided essential companionship, more and more people found they simply could not afford to keep a large dog or a cat in their homes. People began to choose smaller companions. The large breeds simply consumed too much. By 2030, we saw the pivot toward practical pets. People opted for companions that also provided nourishment. Chickens turned out to be surprisingly friendly and social, becoming the rage in suburbs and even in the heart of cities. The caretakers benefited from the eggs, a small craze in a tightening economy. Then came the surge in guinea pigs. Once a delicacy in South America, they became popular across the North, an inexpensive pet that could, in a pinch, provide a meal. By 2040, pet sharing became common, just as self-driving car share services like Uber and EcoCar took over the road. Services like PetPal took over the neighborhood. Animal lovers could spend a few hours with a dog, a lizard, or a bird without the mounting cost of full-time care. By 2050, we saw the rise of animal rescue surrogate programs. As species reached the brink of extinction, our ancestors transformed their homes, gardens, and community centers into shelters. They didn't just keep pets, they sheltered the at-risk, becoming stewards of the disappearing. It was during this time that our theology began to catch up with our necessity. We moved beyond animal rights as a mere legal concept and toward a recognition of animal divinity. We realized we were not owners of property, but witnesses to a sacred, non-human life. By 2075, 70 years ago now, something deeply shifted within the public consciousness. Historians note a dramatic decrease in the interest in pet care. Society had changed. Because of the bold, creative moves our ancestors made to address the climate, our communities had become closer. We established active, friendly collectives. We spent more time cooking together, eating together, and sharing communal spaces. Frankly, our ancestors became happier as they connected with their neighbors. They found their need for companionship was finally being met through their friendships with other humans. This was perhaps the greatest gift we ever gave the animals. We stopped asking them to heal our isolation and started allowing them to exist in their own divine light. This day in the year 2115, we remember our bold, creative, and determined ancestors. The efforts they made in their lifetimes and the animals that walked beside them bless us every day.
Thank you, Peterson, for that strange and wonderful story.
Tory Stephens is a storyteller, organizer, and cultural strategist. As the creative manager for Imagine 2200, he's worked with writers around the world to craft stories that move us from fear to possibility. We talk about spirituality and storytelling, about hope as praxis, and about why fiction can sometimes reach people that facts cannot. Let's listen. Tory, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being a part of this season of Climate Changed. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to pick up right where you were going before we started recording. I was sharing a little bit about the theme of this season, spiritual leadership on the front lines of climate change, chaplaincy and spiritual care and support on the front lines of climate change. And you were saying, I have a lot of thoughts about this.
Yes, I manage a climate fiction initiative at Grist. I'm actually the founder as well. Through reading stories over the past 5 years, a little bit before the pandemic, we lean into having stories that are filled with culture, where people's identities and their culture are not left on the cutting room floor. We're really interested in stories where culture is very present in people's lives. One of the things that I've noticed in the stories that we've received over the years is that there's not a lot of characters that lean into their spirituality or religion. This is something that I see in climate fiction kind of broadly. You know, you have characters, you might even have diverse characters and interesting characters, but you don't see characters that are religious, like a Muslim character where, you know, maybe they name check that the person is Muslim, but that's about it.
It's like signal.
Yeah, like that character's Muslim, but they're not really bringing in all the things that make up his or her identity. We all know the movie Aliens, or like a science fiction movie where everyone has this kind of like blue or green jumpsuit, and they have their like name tag. It says like
Mhm.
Brown and Stevens, right? We're on the
Mhm.
go.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
moving through the smoke and the kind of fog. Our identity has been stripped because the people's world building and imagination has not brought in the culture. In the future, there will be Hindu people and they will be dressed differently than the other folks in your crew or
Right.
team. And likewise, we're not moving forward to kind of like get rid of culture. We're like creating culture as we go. It's a big critique I have with respect
Mm.
to, I won't say speculative fictions, but like definitely in climate fiction and science fiction for years has done this. Like Star Trek, they all have the same uniform. And I get that they're on like a crew, but there's ways to signal. I mean, it doesn't even have to be their clothing. It's like what they do in their private cabin room or whatever.
Right,
Like,
right. One of the special sort of fun side projects of my life is that my sister and I lead this visionary fiction writing workshop that happens every year in Ireland. Ireland is one of the places in the world that navigated colonization in an interesting way. We bring a bunch of people together and we have them do this world building process. And then they all write inside of the world that we build. There tends to be a sort of wrestling with the sacred or wrestling with
mm,
spiritual practice or wrestling with reclaiming spiritual practice as a part of the world that they're building. So I'm curious to notice that that's a part of the visionary fiction. I wonder if there's something about visionary fiction or if there's something about the framing that is eliciting a particular way of thinking about it. Whether there's something that's being expressed, like a sort of hopelessness that is expressed in the lack of presencing
mm,
of the sacred or lack of presencing of cultural expressions of sacredness. Well, I mean, what do you
mhm.
attribute it to?
I think a big part of it is that climate fiction is adjacent to science fiction.
Mhm.
Science fiction had the problem for a long time, as I was describing. People are so focused on the world building and the other aspects of the story that they forget culture.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where it comes from, to be honest, but I do think that there's an idea that in the future, it would be better. I'm speaking for the collective writers out there or the ethos out there. It would be better if we lost our culture or something like that,
Mm,
where there's less difference, so there's less problems. The only thing that I can think of is that there's this idea that less difference will make it easier for us to be on the same team. And the other part of this is kind of the worlds that people are building. My advocacy here is that we need to lean into the difference that people have, show that those expressions from religion to foodways, clothing, music, everything. Like really,
yeah.
people's identity needs to be deeper and more layered and more nuanced
In our storytelling.
in our storytelling because instead what we're doing is we're focusing a lot on the world building and not on the world building of the individual characters.
Fascinating. The thing that immediately comes to my mind is colonization or like a colonial way of thinking as one of the reasons why we would have this orientation to sameness being the thing that produces more peace, right?
For the longest time, I was a fundraiser for folks living with HIV and AIDS, for the protection of Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act. For the longest time, I was the one who sent the appeals that you got in your inbox. Or as I got older, we would marry those with Facebook and email campaigns. And one of the things that really changed my thinking around fundraising and storytelling was I just thought the appeals we were drafting for the longest time were boring. They were essentially a laundry list of, hey, we've been really good stewards of your money. We bought this many condoms in this quarter. We passed this many out. We gave this many doses of Narcan out. That's all great. And we should be reporting that out. But it wasn't focused on the individuals that were living with HIV and AIDS and what their
Mm,
lives were like and how they were impacted by this disease and how they were helped by the agency. And so I was reading on Facebook this blog, which I think most people know now is Humans of New York.
Yeah.
I guess we could talk about all the problems that there are about this kind of gaze that this individual has with individuals. But there is a part of it that I was attracted to, which was I just wanted to know about these people. And I thought they were really interesting. And I didn't know where the story was going to go. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, that's the type of storytelling we need for our agency.
Huh.
And then I encountered the Deep South, the work that we were doing in the Deep South because of the expansion of Medicaid. One of the things that I did not encounter in my life until I started working in the Deep South is Cancer Alley and the frontline community down there in Louisiana and in the Gulf, where folks are having all sorts of health issues because of the fossil fuel industry, the chemicals down there, in the plastic industry. Like, I knew about climate change, but I
Mm.
didn't make the connection between health, like people's individual health, and climate change until then. And then that's when I was like, okay, I know the next thing I want to do is move into the climate change, whatever sector or field. I just wanted to help from a social justice angle, get involved. And so I was like more this like urgency, 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 because
Mm.
I'd been in the fights for protection of the Affordable Care Act. And when I thought about the people in Louisiana, there was a woman who I didn't get to interview, but someone else at the organization had interviewed this woman, and I was reading it because we were possibly going to use it for an appeal. She hadn't had consistent health care for 30 years and had an ailment that was really bothering her. It was like a stomach, GI thing, and had no ability to kind of fix that. And I just thought about how many more millions of people have that particular situation and
Mm-hmm.
can't do anything about it because you don't have the money. In some of these places, you can't just show up and get the care that you need. Then fast forward, ended up working at Grist. Grist has a way with words. We have editors. It just made a lot of sense. There's other news organizations that have a fiction kind of section or department.
And now, what is the use of speculative fiction and climate fiction as a way to address the issues of, for example, this woman in Louisiana who's having this ailment and can't get care? How do you see this particular type of creative work addressing those kinds of issues?
Speculative fiction opens up a lot of opportunity for us to dream about the futures that we want, as opposed to the things that we don't want. And I think like what I started to notice after managing this project, being at Grist and reading the news every day around what's going on in the world, is that there's a lot of what we don't want institutions to do or what we don't want in life, but there's less of what we want to choose, what's the world that we want if we had power and control, through democratic means. If the people, I have to put that in there.
Democratically, we have control.
I have to put that in there because of where we are right now,
Truly, truly.
Um, but like, speculative fiction allows people to dream and imagine and create. We in the climate space need more of that. And then the other piece of this is that there's folks who are not moved by the news. They are, more invested in fiction. They get their orientation from fiction, and the emotional part of fiction, it just works for some people. So you're never going to reach those people. And then there's people who do both. Like, I read news and I also read fiction.
Right, right.
I want like there to be, abundant climate fiction that is full of beautiful characters that I can relate to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, there's a way that I want us to circle back to the question of spirituality and
Okay.
in relationship to everything you just named about how it lets us know what it is that we want, or it lets us dream into what we want. But I want to kind of do a little detour into the contest. Up until January 2025, you were running this contest and you're still publishing fiction. I'm curious, like, in that process, with all of the stories that you read, is there a story that you received in that time period that has continued to resurface for you, do its work on you and shifting what you thought was possible?
There's this story that really deals with grief. Let me start by saying every story that we publish, I think of like these imaginary dials that the writer or author has where they can turn up climate solutions up to 80. Hope is maybe a 30 on that story. It's not as hopeful as this other story, right? All right. So there's all these dials, and this one was dialed up on the emotional level of grief. And that was like the main vibe that you're getting from this story, even though it is a climate fiction story. But what it led with and what you, the reader, took away with it was, yeah, this is a climate fiction story, but this is a story that's so much more than that. It's about grief. It's also about intergenerational listening or non-listening, because the granddaughter is not listening to her grandmother because she's older and she's looking for this climate solution, is like annoyed that she has to like call her grandmother every day, listen to the kind of same repeat stories that her grandmother says. But at the same time, the whole time, this woman is going to give her the key that she needs to figure out the climate solution that she's been working on. So she just shushed her mouth and listened, that wisdom would have been transferred over to her. The grandmother passes and the grief that is there. I thought about that and I sat with that for a while, because I was like, what is so relatable about this story? And it's the fact that the grief is something that we all experience. At some point, even if we haven't, we will, right? After that, I was really stuck on looking at all the stories as to kind of what is the emotional piece here. Like if I had to say this story was like the base level is joy, this one, the base level is death or grief or, extreme kind of family feeling.
Mhm.
So from this one particular story, I pulled away, don't discount or miss the other kind of stories that are interwoven, and that a climate fiction story doesn't always have to be dialed up to 100 around everything you're doing with the climate. I see people try to make these stories that are like so climate focused in every facet, with like every doodad in their kitchen and and they lose the character and they lose the base emotion that they're trying to communicate or relate with people.
So true.
I often say sometimes like a good climate fiction story, it's rare that it's dialed up to 80, where it has all these different things buzzing around fixing things and, climate forward and more. It's about the character moving through life and being themselves. And there's some climate fiction in the story. We put out a call globally. Our call was global. Like we put
The
marketing.
call for the fiction was global.
Yeah, the call for the fiction was global. So it wasn't just a contest for United States participants. We have stories from Malaysia, we have stories from New Zealand, we have stories from everywhere. That was a big challenge. But one of the other challenges is just in general, what we found is that people weren't seeing themselves as climate fiction writers because they wrote in a different genre. We were trying to move the needle by saying, no, if you're a mystery writer, you can be a climate fiction writer. Just dial
Mhm.
in some climate fiction to your mystery story. You're already good at this one thing. And so the same for romance, the same for,
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever genre we felt like. If you're like a courtroom kind of style, drama person, bring that and add some climate to it. We have this problem in that the writers are really good at writing, but they don't understand the like climate 101, climate solutions that are out there. And so now we've come to see our role as educating writers around these things. One, maybe they could just read Grist on a regular basis to kind of get their knowledge up. But also, when we ship a story or send it to our email list, the next week we unpack the climate solutions and the justice centered solutions in that particular story so that people can understand them in a deeper level. So I think that's what I was seeing being missed in the stories. I was not seeing people not understanding the mechanics of human beings and characters and what makes a good story. It was more that they were missing on addressing climate at a bigger level.
Mm.
Then the other thing was, a lot of people think climate solutions are just tech-based solutions and not like community changing the way that we live and deal with, or not deal with, or like how we treat our non-human kin. how we treat the earth, like things that are more nature based, indigenous based, those ideas that aren't in kind of modernity as much, because everything is like a quick, easy tech solution in this modern world, or at least that's what a
Mm.
lot of people think. So many of the stories have had too much of that, where there's like a widget or something that, kind of fixes it all.
Mhm.
The stories that we leaned into were the ones where they're not utopian. Do you know this term through-topia?
No.
Okay,
Introduce
so
me.
yes. So this is a kind of interesting term, and this is what a lot of people characterize our stories as. So through-topia comes from the UK, and the idea is that you're showing us on the way to a better world, but we haven't tackled or changed everything. Like if you're really leaning into through-topia, you'd be getting over some of these things and like moving beyond there's a problem, here's the solution, but we're showing how we get to through that moment, as opposed to utopia where it's just everything is like better and we're showing the fully abundant world that we're all living in, which is fine. We publish those stories too, but I think more of the stories that we're publishing are this term of throughtopia, where not everything's been solved. There's still interpersonal relationships where people are living in community with each other. A good story that I could give as an example around this
Mhm.
is a story called Seven Sisters, where there's these women who are working on a tea farm in a collective kind of space, a farm that they, make collective decisions on. And a few of their drones go down, and they have to make this choice between picking the tea on their own by hand, which is very labor intensive. And at the same time, they're having like money issues, so they can't fix the drone. And while they're kind of contemplating this issue, their buyer, who is also one of the folks that live on the farm, is in Brazil. And in Brazil, they had had a flood, and there's a family that is displaced. And this woman introduces the idea that she wants to bring this woman and her baby into the collective. And they have this like discussion around, can we feed this family? Like this idea of like, I don't know if we should like bring another human into our like collective, but like there's this moral question. This is our kind of, this is our way. We need to accept these people. So to show that kind of dynamic, that even in
Hmm.
social justice communities where people are in right relationship with each other, there's still going to be hard decisions to make. Even, your drone goes down, you're having financial problems. The I would say like the mother of the family is the one saying like, let's think about this. Like, can we really accept like a mom and her baby? That's so hard. But there's a few people that are like, no, we have to do this. Like, this is like
Mhm.
the right
Mhm.
thing to do. It turns out that and I'm telling like a lot of this story, but I still think it's an enjoyable story, even if I'm telling some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, turns out that the woman who they bring into the farm can also fix drones. So,
Yeah. That's beautiful. Wow. I really appreciate you giving an example of one of the stories that y'all published also. I appreciate this idea of the through-topia, a way of recognizing that regardless of where we are in the process, we're still going to be navigating some of the same core questions that humans have always been navigating, which is
right.
how do we share resources?
Right.
How do we distribute what we have? How do we make decisions together about how do we self-govern? How do we do conflict? How do we solve or repair when harm has happened? That those are like core elements of the human experience. They don't go away. Say we find our way out of fascism, which I pray that we do, and I believe that is possible, but we will still have those same core human questions, human experiences.
That
There's a hope, I think, and beauty in that too, of being able to represent. When we were speaking with one of our other guests for the show, Norma Wong, she talks about this idea of being able to effort in service of the place beyond collapse. This notion of throughtopia seems to be like supporting this way of thinking that like we are going to move through this. At
mhm.
least some of us are going to be on the other side of it. You
Right.
know, like there is a wayfinding that's happening or a path that is going to unfold. And
That's right.
it's interesting to think about how much of the fiction that we consume, maybe in our dominant culture, even the stuff that we really enjoy, because like I'm a huge fan of the Alien franchise, right? But
Same
it's
here.
but it's a great example of like a very, very cynical orientation
Hmm.
to the future, right? It's a representation of a hyper capitalist corporate future in which people's
That's right.
cultures have really been pretty much completely erased. And
Yeah.
it makes me wonder about the connection between that cynicism, the cynicism we have about the time that we're in,
Mm.
and how spirituality and culture does and doesn't show up.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I talk about often is this misbalance between dystopian and hopeful stories that exist in our dominant culture.
Mm,
We're addicted to dystopian stories. It's very clear that we're addicted to them. I'm not shaming or saying that dystopian stories are bad. I actually think they're good. They show everything that we don't want the world to become. We don't want to have a world that is, devoid of culture, that is full of aliens or, corporate overlords. But the balance is really, there is no balance. I would say 95% of what we consume is dystopian. 95% in, like, the sci-fi world depicted on film. There's a misbalance. There's a room for hopeful stories, and I'm not talking about a rom-com. I'm talking something that's more expansive, that shows where we are tackling some of these problems like the climate crisis, like capitalism, like white supremacy in a big way. That's something that I bring into the discussion because there needs to be more focus on creating more abundant futures and even just abundant stories where we're winning, where we're working together. We want to show the way we want the world to be.
hmm Yes, beautiful. I do have a question that's related to this. The question comes from my co-host Nicole Diroff. She heard you say something, I think in an event that you recently did with the BTS Center. You said
Okay.
something about transforming hope from a feeling into a collective praxis. And
Yeah.
yeah, the cynicism that people are experiencing is very real, right? And the fact that we are tending more towards dystopian stories, that's happening for a reason, right? There's a lot of hopelessness and a lot of helplessness and powerlessness that people are feeling in the face of the extraordinary amount of loss and grief that's happening. And I don't mean in any way to be dismissive of how incredible the reasons are to feel hopeless and powerless. But there's also this other way of orienting to hope that is like less ideological. And it seems like that's kind of what you're getting at in the comment that you made. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about where that came from inside of you.
The backstory around founding a climate fiction initiative at Grist is that Grist has had a ethos of hope. Their old tagline was like a beacon in the smog. They see themselves as like a hopeful place, a place where climate solutions should be presented because those are the things that are hopeful that are going to get us out of this crisis if we implement them. That's like the vibe at Grist. We at Imagine 2200 have hopeful climate fiction stories. There's another genre. It's very tiny. It's very small. It's called hope punk. It's rare if you find like a bookstore that has like a hope punk section, but there have been like articles written on hope punk and what it is and how it's like the opposite of grim dark. Question I kept asking myself is it odd to talk about hope with people? If you ask your mom, your brother, your sister, people close to you, your family, what does hope look like to you? I used to be evangelical when I was a lot younger, and I think these kind of questions are easy to ask in a Christian community.
Hmm.
In religious communities, you ask deep questions like this, like what has been beautiful about your week, or social justice communities, movement communities, we ask these kind of questions. But in regular life, like if I saw my neighbor and I was like, what's bringing you hope these days? That's like a weird question, right? Like, it's really weird to kind of ask people that. I started to be like, all right, we need to defibrillate and jumpstart this. It would be nice to live in a society where that praxis wasn't weird. That was our normal kind of like, hey, how you doing? What's bringing you hope? Like, yeah, it sounds silly like saying it, but like, what if it wasn't silly? What if it wasn't seen as awkward to discuss that? That in its essence shows where we are. Like I could talk to my neighbor and be like, oh, this terrible thing happened. That would be kind of like easy, right?
Yeah.
When you're putting out a call that says, hey, we're looking for a story that's anywhere from 3 to 5,000 words. It's climate fiction, but it has to be hopeful. Many of the writers were like, that is a challenge. And some of them showed up. People have written to me and said that their reflexive muscle for 15 years or whatever, how many years they've been a writer was to write dystopian stories. And now they know how to deliver a hopeful story. They had never even
Wow.
tried. Now we have folks that have submitted stories and won more than once, figure out this muscle memory of how to do this and deliver in a way that is interesting, entertaining, and delivers climate fiction that's hopeful. The praxis is around this idea of getting more people to think about hope
Hmm.
in the same way that we're addicted to dystopian stories. And I think a lot of people in politics get this wrong. Some people lean into the fear, the anxieties, the anger they have, but there's others who lean into the hope, the joy, the community, the democracy that we could have. There's a choice there. And so we just need to keep making choices around hope and like encouraging others to talk, think, dream, write, and create joy and hope.
Yes, right. It's a different narrative position to start from. And I really appreciate what you named about how it's more typical within faith communities to ask each other those more depthful, reflective questions than it is outside of those spaces. When we're thinking about chaplaincy on the front lines and spiritual leadership for a climate changed world, there's this muscle that people within whatever the faith tradition is, there's a muscle that people build inside of faith community that is actually something that's needed, like deeply needed
That's
outside
right.
of those spaces, which is the muscle of asking people to be in deep reflection about what is good and what is beautiful and what is faith filled, what is hope filled, what is filled with possibility.
Mhm.
The idea that that is something that we could see ourselves as being responsible for in one another, what I'm hearing from you is this idea that like that in and of itself is the praxis, right? The idea of
Right.
like seeing myself as I'm responsible for like eliciting hope in you. You're responsible for eliciting hope in me. And
Yep.
that's part of how we find our way out of this mess. One of the reasons why I love speculative fiction of all kinds is because of the prefigurative nature of it, like the way that
Mhm.
Isaac Asimov prefigures the internet. There's all this cool shit that happens in this world. Not that we can credit science fiction writers for all the cool things that have ever happened, but like there's a
Right.
lot. There's a lot that we come up with that
There's
then
a
finds
conversation
there's a
between,
conversation. Exactly. So
yeah,
I'm curious to know, with all of what you've been taking in, what's a transformation of society and humanity or an opportunity to innovate in society and humanity that you feel really excited about that is coming through climate fiction stories that you're reading?
we received over 4,000 stories in the past 4 years. We were receiving 1,000 stories a year, which is a lot. But, we have reviewers. I don't read all of them. I read usually around the 150 level and below. But we didn't receive a lot of stories where animals were in the stories. Like it's very human centric stories, not even pets. They're great stories, but there wasn't a lot of care for an imagination around our non-human kin that could become character. Even if they're like a non-speaking character because cats don't talk or whatever,
Mhm, mhm.
they need to be present in the stories because in the future, again, like culture, we will have our pets, we will have animals, we'll be in relationship with animals in some sort of level. But there's a recent story. It's called The Case of the Missing Lake. It is around a lake that goes missing or is hidden from this microbial network and mushrooms, essentially. There's like a whole backstory to why that's happening. I sat down with the author, and one of the things that influenced her was the legal fights to give rivers legal rights, certain animals legal rights. And so she took that idea further, and there's like this whole whodunit, like, did someone kill this lake and blah, blah, blah. So the microbial network is taken to court. That
Whoa.
idea that they have rights enough that they're able to come to court, and there's like this translator who uses this headset to communicate with the microbial network. It brings in a lot of these like newer things that we've learned around mushrooms and the network that they have underneath them.
Mm,
The fiction writer can kind of make it easy for us to understand and even
right.
expound on it.
Right. That there's a way that the science fiction or speculative fiction or climate fiction writer, through being in conversation with the science, with the research, with these ideas, it's like they're helping us understand the implications. What are the implications
Hmm.
of
Right.
sentient, of things that we perceive as not sentient? What are the implications of that for society? And it's a beautiful place for us to land, Tori. There's a way that that is also spiritual leadership, right? Being with the truth of what is, and then helping the people in our communities understand the implications of what is happening and make meaning of it. There's a real way that the creative process, it's like helping to doula our meaning making, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I like that. Doula our meaning making. That's a
Yeah.
beautiful.
Wow. Well, this was such an awesome conversation. I am
Yeah.
so delighted to have spoken to you. And tonight I'm going to go read that story, which I assume is on the Grist website,
Yes. The case for the missing lake.
The Case for the Missing Lake. I'm so grateful to you for the work that you're doing, the work that you've been doing, holding this particular lane of hope in climate fiction and eliciting stories that are hopeful at this time. Such deeply fortifying work for the world. And I think about this all the time. We don't know all the ripples of what our work is going to do for other people, but I can sit here just in conversation with you and know that there's an enormous ripple effect into the future of the work that you're doing now. And so I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody who's touched by it.
Oh my God. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Thanks, Tori.
Thank you for joining us for this beautiful conversation. There is still so much more to explore. So we're going to keep the conversation going. Next week on Climate Changed, you will get to hear my conversation with Autumn as we unpack the profound themes and ideas raised today and share some concrete next steps you can take in your own life and community. Make sure you're subscribed so you do not miss it. See you next week. Climate Changed is a podcast from the BTS Center, where we are cultivating spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world.
Find transcripts, discussion guides, and now full-length video episodes plus bonus material on the BTS Center's YouTube page. Explore more at thebtscenter.org and Climate Changed Podcast.
Stay connected, share this episode, and reach out anytime. Autumn and I would love to hear from you.
And as we close, here's a blessing for today. May you be imaginative. May you be creative. May you feel connected to one another in your vision of a new world.
Amen.
Amen. In the next episode of Climate Changed, I think for a long time we would all say we're on the precipice of collapse. And now we're in the landslide. You know what I mean? It's like we're all avalanching down the mountain together. Actually, the thing that's required of us is to find a sense of agency inside of all of that. Practices like what Tory leads people through, reclaiming a sense of agency related to the future through fiction.
Which is surprising for many. I think when people think about climate change and being an environmentalist or something, and they think of discipline and practice, they come to things like composting. It's like, what? A practice would be imagining positive futures for our hearts and souls? I need to, get my compost to the bin.